Again, I'm Kenny Fikes, host of the iKnowMedia Roundtable, where we bring you conscientious clarity alongside both empirical experience and reasoned analysis and applications. We have a good show for you today, and we are particularly qualified for this show, although we are on all of them through our conscious clarity. Tell us who you guys are.
Hey guys, I'm Elisa Simmons. I'm a Montessori guide and a school owner, and I have been thinking about tonight's topic nonstop for a few months.
Hi everyone, my name is Jayshree Ellis. You can call me Jay. I am a mother of 3, and my youngest child has autism, so I really am eager to hear what my colleagues have to say about how our schools should reopen.
I'm Michael Malofsky. I'm a pediatrician in Denver, Colorado, parent of 7, and I was going to drop my kids off whether or not the building was open.
Gotcha. Well, so as I already alluded to, we have a thoughtful, intelligent crew that's qualified to talk about pretty much anything you want to talk about because there's some well-read folks. But today, having a person who runs and owns a school and 2 MDs, one who's specifically a pediatrician and a father of 7, I can't get it on one hand, 7. We are particularly qualified to talk about it today. And the second note is, in this age of extreme politics where so many people take sides, they find out what their side politically believes and they take that. This is a very difficult issue because it involves so many different pieces. It's unfortunate that folks are deciding based on their politics. So today's show, we'll call it School Openings, the good, the bad, the ugly, and what we should do about it, and why or why not. And let me just start with a little things to think about in terms of stakeholders. They're the kids. We're thinking about their health, learning, socializing, their growth. There's a difference between older kids and younger kids. Parents, health risks, work, income, the safety of the kids versus the health. Teachers, health, income, what happens, technology, older parents' health that they go home to and take care of, the administration, health, accountability, technology access, technology competency, business out there, the economy, health again, employees, customers, all these things. Lots of stakeholders, lots of issues. I was in a little country church in Tampa, Florida years ago, and a visiting little preacher said, "What is we to do?" So I'm going to say, in that little country preacher's words, what is we to do? Who wants to start us off? Michael, pediatrician, why don't you start us off with this one?
So I'm like Elisa and I were discussing before we went on how we've been immersed in this topic for weeks and weeks and weeks. And what I have been doing is, in my role, is that I've been trying to help people create a roadmap for themselves. Because as you mentioned, Kenny, there is no single easy answer that any one family can apply to themselves, that it is a very unique answer depending on all those factors between you and your kids, and you got to put it on a scale, and you have to decide, based on your risk tolerance and your individual family situation, what is going to be the best situation for you and your kids. And it has to be both sides, because if you can't function because of income loss, job, and or a mental and emotional stability with regards to what your kids are doing all day, that doesn't matter if your kids are where your kids are, that it's not working, and you have to change it. And you have to put it all in that perspective. That's been, I think, our biggest focus from the pediatric community, is helping people think differently about this, that it's not, you can't just go to an expert and say, tell me what to do. Everybody really has to be their own expert in the sense of all those things you mentioned to be able to create a roadmap for themselves.
Okay. Lisa, want to jump in there?
Sure. So I've been dealing with this issue nonstop every day since shutdown started. And I think because of the economic impact, especially early child care, because if you're looking at a child below the age of 10, most parents will not leave a child 10 and below at home by themselves in this day and age. And so below 10, you need your child to go somewhere during the day. to go to school, to go to a program of some sort. I think for what's so frustrating to many of the parents during a situation like this is that as much as you have to look at what's right for every individual family, when the information and it becomes a team and it becomes politicized, and then the information changes so regularly, it's so hard for parents to feel like they are empowered enough to make that accurate decision. And so it takes a lot of studying, and then it takes a lot of communication amongst parents and your extended family on what your different options can be in a situation like this, because we're in uncharted territories. None of us have ever lived through something like this.
All right. Jay Sharif.
I mean, I think there's so many issues to consider, and sometimes, it just varies from family to family, and as Elisa pointed out, age to age, right? So, I mean, one of the things, of course, is a concern about if their kids are going to learn. I think that we can all probably agree that at the latter part of the year, probably none of the kids learn, regardless of the age, very much, And when you speak to educators, at that time, they were thrust into a situation that they have to try to come up with what to do. And most of the people I spoke with who are teachers said, listen, we weren't trying to teach anything anymore. It was just, let's keep our kids from regressing, right? And a child's progress was going to be dependent upon how much could be done at home for them. And that was hard because parents were thrust into a situation where they had to try to teach. They were trying to work from home, and, and nothing was certain. I think one of the things that's also really difficult is the fact that this hasn't been done before. Okay, we know that, yes, there was a pandemic 100 years ago, but life is very different. So I think it's very disconcerting as a parent when you realize that your school doesn't know what to do, school district doesn't know what to do, federal government doesn't know what to do, just don't know. And I think that, as Americans, we're accustomed to having a standard, or at least believing that there's this gold standard for what we follow, and we have best practices and it'll all work out. That's not any of this right now. And so that's very, very, very worrisome when you're a parent. And then this is a situation where we're not just talking about the child learning. Most times in schools, we're trying to figure out what's best for these children to learn. But that's not the only thing that has to be considered. Very much the idea of what happens to the family unit. How do we make sure a parent can work? And then parents just being exhausted, right? Because when this started and people were at home with kids, if you've got small kids at home, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it doesn't matter how much you love them, right? This is exhausting. And you couldn't even take them out. You couldn't say, well, it's Saturday, we're going to go to this party, we're going to go to Chuck E. Cheese. No, it was like, you're going to be home, and parents are tired. And then we're going to see more of this, and there's like no relief. So I think there's so many things that are just kind of needling away at our ability to really just be resilient at this point.
Yes.
Yeah, a little follow up to something you just said, Jay, and to something Elisa said. From what you said, Jay, people are accustomed to some sort of a format and protocol, and I reiterate what I said in the outset, is that unfortunately today we're so divided politically that people are not thinking for themselves. There was a time when we at least gave benefit of the doubt to whatever the system sort of said and what the president or the governor may say or what the superintendent may say. We allowed the experts to be the experts and relied on those people who gave good advice to those in charge. And right now, unfortunately, people are so much are zealots about politics to the point that they seem to listen more to a political party than they do good ideas. Responding to something you said, Elisa, in this day and age, I know for me, part of it is growing up in a smaller town, but at the time that I came up, my mother was very responsible in terms of being a mother, but I could leave on a Saturday morning on my bicycle at 9 o'clock and get back home at 5 in the afternoon, and it wasn't a big deal. At 9 years old, we did that. And now, I think someone would say that you're a bad parent if you leave a 12-year-old at home for 4 hours.
Yes.
And so, yeah. Michael, what about, could you tell us a bit about your thoughts on the emotional well-being of younger kids and how you feel about the difference in kids, say, you pick a number, I'm just picking a number right now, under 10 versus over 10, or say a third grader versus a senior in high school, and distance learning and their development in terms of who they are? What do you think about that?
Well, you know, just in my day-to-day experience in the office, I've been talking to families daily for months, you know, since this all started. The thing that strikes me is that there's a huge variability even within families and between families in terms of how kids have responded to this. As you guys know, everyone here is a parent. Some of my kids are way more emotionally resilient and way more easygoing about these kinds of changes than others. For 2 or 3 of my kids, especially, like, I'll give you an example. My 7th kid has been walking around saying, I want to do remote learning forever. This was the best thing ever. And she thought it was the greatest thing since the wheel. And I had other kids who were literally emotionally distraught over the process. And I'm seeing that across the board. I definitely think it takes more of an emotional toll in the middle school and high school because there's so much more emphasis in their lives on their peer community and how much that means to them. Not that younger kids don't have friends, but it doesn't have the same place in the pantheon of their lives. So, and we're seeing that reflected all the time. Not in the pediatric community is exchanging information around the country about, you know, adolescent mental health was already a problem and has really escalated in a big way since March because of the increased isolation of this whole process, and in a population that was already experiencing, because of technology and other factors, an increased isolation and a decreased engagement with one another already before they closed schools. And there are a lot more kids who were teetering on the edge emotionally. And now we're seeing way more.
Yeah. So I'm not a doctor, but I did sleep at a Holiday Inn
Express
last night.
Yeah.
Holiday Inn Express. Jay Cherie, what do you think of, you know, sort of the whole idea of development for young boys and girls in, say, middle school and wearing a mask, right? It's important how we look. It's important what we do with our eyes or mascara. It's important how we flip our hair. It's important whether we have some peach fuzz coming in and we want a little goatee or a little something. It's important, you know, when people look at your teeth, right? Are they all right? So how do you feel about sort of, you know, I don't know if we're related to Erickson's stages of development. What's that, Psych 101 or 102? And what's going on with a child at 11 and 12 and 13 and putting a mask over themselves? Or is that a good thing? And Elisa will chime in on this later, sort of like school uniforms, where it doesn't differentiate people so much based on socioeconomics or whatever, but everyone's got a mask. What do you think about that?
I think that's an age, and certainly Elisa could probably talk a lot more to this, but I think it's an age where there's so much variation in terms of their feeling of themselves, their comfort in their own skin. You know, you have some kids who are kind of going through a physical metamorphosis and it makes them feel very uneasy and uncertain. You know, there's also this age where, like, girls get kind of mean. And so there's so many things that can be kind of undermining to a preteens or a young teen's self-confidence. But at the same time, you know, this could be a way to kind of hide in plain sight too, right? If you've got acne and you don't want anyone to see that pimple, well, you might be happy for your mask. Or if, you know, if you're a kid who has a great sense of yourself, like, you can just become unique. You can bling your mask out. You can have different masks. You can have matching masks with your outfits. I think it very much depends on the young person, but I think it also depends on how they are supported at home. And I think this is where, you know, as parents, we always need to be paying attention. And there's so much that gets by us because we often don't read the undertones of what's happening with our children. But this is one of those places where, as a parent, you probably really need to figure out, how is your child really feeling about wearing this mask? Are they happy to have it? Because again, they can hide a little bit. Or do they feel like it's not allowing them to be themselves, or, you know, they can't show everyone how cute they are? And so I think we have to try to support wherever they are, meet them where they are, and use it as teaching moments, right? Where I think you can easily say to a young person, listen, and it's this whole thing, right? We can look at everything that's a problem about this and be mad about it and pout and complain. Or we can try to look at what we get from it, what was positive, what did it allow us to grow and do. You know, even just comparing, you know, like I told my daughter when she came home from college, I'm like, I don't want to hear you complain. right? You get to finish your semester. I know it's not in person. If this was 20 years ago, you'd be withdrawing from all your classes and you'd have to figure out when to make those up again, right? I know you miss your friends. If this had been 25 years ago, there would be no FaceTime, no house party, no Google Hangouts, none of that. It would be thousands of dollars in long distance calls because you'd have to call all your friends all summer. So I think sometimes we have to kind of acknowledge that it's uncomfortable, but say there are ways we can grow and we can be innovative and we can be resourceful. And at the end of the day, there are going to be some people who end up very prosperous because they have that perspective on all of this change.
So let me tell you what I'm sort of laughing at listening to you say right now. We have really become and after I heard myself say it, I laughed at myself. I said, these kids today, and what I just heard you say in a more eloquent level as an analogy, my mother used to tell me because I said so, and I hated that so much that I said, when I have kids, I'm not going to say that. So what I found myself saying to my son when he was younger was, listen, you just need to trust me because your life's experience would not allow you to comprehend the reasoning if I explained it to you. So you got to trust me, which is really just saying, and Jay Cherie just said, when I was your age, we walked 10 miles to school. But she said it in a modern tone of, you'd have been withdrawing from your classes, right? So that's kind of funny. Elisa, what do you think about sort of these things as a person who runs a school about a mask? Could you give us a little bit of the good, the bad, the ugly about it? Sort of like a high school debating class, they ask you to pick a side, right? No matter what you believe. I'd like to hear a little bit of your argument for the mask, for not having the mask, and then sort of what you really think.
Okay, so kids are so much easier to adapt when they're below the age of 10. Puberty sucks. And so below the age of 10, children understand things because we're always constantly introducing something new to them. We're introducing a cup rather than a sippy cup. We're introducing forks rather than that fake spoon. We're constantly introducing new things. So for me, I think during this COVID situation, as a school and as a mom, what we've done is we have try to normalize what needs to happen. We want the kids to understand the real why it is there. So we actually went through and swabbed things and did Petri studies. That way the kids could see there's things you just can't see that can affect you. With the ideal of the mask, I think it's our kids wear a seatbelt. Even if they kick and scream, we're going to put a seatbelt on them, no matter what. So, but when if you tell your kid that the seatbelt is because mommy's going to get a ticket when the police pull me over, then they don't understand why that seatbelt affects them. You're getting the ticket, not me. So rather than that, at our school, what we do is I put a skeleton in the back of a car and me and the kids push the car and the skeleton is in the floor of the seat. The kids all understand at that moment why they need to wear a car seat. It's the same thing with the face mask. If I explain to them the medical issues that can come along with having COVID, giving COVID to one of your peers, kids will do that. The negative thing, though, is I'm in a unique situation because my school is very controlled and small. The larger schools, though, if you have a kindergarten kid who's expected to keep this on all day and they play with their shoes still, this is going to be the nastiest thing on the planet. And so we have to come up with, different ways that are going to work depending on the age groups. If you have a high school student who refuses to wear this all day, they need their butt whooped, verbally or physically, whatever you're into, but they need their butt whooped. But if a first grader or kindergarten, you have to think of different tactics. And as parents, if you're making this decision to send your kids to school in the fall, this should be something you're already working on. It's July, fall is coming. At home, you should be doing face mask drills. You should be how to hold your face mask, how to put it away, and doing those drills at home to get them ready for the fall. And it's one of those simple things, but I think so many parents are seeing this politicized, so they're taking sides on it, and that's going to feed over into their parents in the fall. So there's all kinds of pros and cons both ways, but at the end of the day, it's the easiest thing to do to try to minimize exposure, you giving it to someone else. So put your car seat on, put your seatbelt on, put your face mask on.
Gotcha.
That's me.
So I do relate to kids having this idea of empathy for others or someone else. Little anecdotal story. My son was in 5th grade, which means he was 10 and my daughter was 2. They're 8 years apart. He was never a bad kid, but he was just playful and he was talking a lot in the beginning of that year. And I would take away something, you know, threaten another punishment. He was still just talking a lot. And the one thing that worked, I thought of this because of your skeleton. I said, Miles, when your sister comes along, if she has the same teacher, they're going to treat her like, they're going to be like, oh, that's that Fikes boy's little sister. And they're going to treat her like you were acting. Immediately, he changed.
Yeah. I was like, okay, protect.
Yeah. So Jay, from the perspective of, you know, we talk about health risks, physical risk, development. You are an advocate for children with disabilities and others. What are your thoughts on schools opening versus not opening for children with disabilities?
You know, I think for a lot of them, it's not going to be a good situation, especially I think when we're talking about children who have intellectual disabilities, right? The children with physical disabilities, you know, they otherwise understand what they need to do. They may need some support around physically carrying things out. But if we have students with intellectual disabilities, they may or may not be able to comply, right? If you have a child who, you know, like my son has both an expressive and a receptive language disorder. So in addition to him not being able to form words, he doesn't always understand words. And it's hard for him to understand abstract concepts. So anything we can show him a picture of or an object, he could. But if we talk about things like danger and sickness, he doesn't understand that. So when you have that as a barrier or a challenge, you can't really explain why it becomes important. Now it's a matter of, can we condition the student to just always do the right thing? The hard part about that is that scenarios change. So whereas maybe you can condition students with intellectual disabilities to sit in certain seats, you can space them yourself, but they may not understand that when they stand up, they still shouldn't be more than this far apart. And so when you don't have that, that means that in the class you have more risk of exposure of everything. And you already have a scenario where, you know, the teacher, she's tasked with understanding each student's disability. And that can vary so much from student to student and what they need, what has to be done to support them just on an average day before we start talking about minimizing contact and exposure with the virus. I think that our special education departments in schools often are poorly equipped and poorly resourced. I think we have a lot of people there who want to be there and want to do the best job, but we already don't have what we need in the standard school district. And so now we need bigger classrooms, you know, we need more personnel probably. And then we need to be able to offer, when we develop these individual programs for each student, which is what the IDEA law says we're supposed to do, you know, eventually this is probably going to have to become a part of that. If we don't end up with a vaccine soon, it will have to be in each student's individual education plan that this is what we're going to do to protect him or her, and this is what we're going to do to teach this child how to interact in this new world. Right. So I think it's going to be very complex. I personally think that if it's possible for that student to be at home more, that's a good thing. But with that being said, not being in school means that they don't have the benefit of other students around whom they can mimic. And that is a big part of them learning, and especially when they have ID. So, you know, when you remove them from the physical classroom and we're only learning online, they don't get the opportunity to see what other students do and do what those students do. So you get a lot of loss of learning, right, just that with that peer interaction.
And then how do you weigh that? You're absolutely right. Schools already don't have what they need. And then how do you weigh that against the economy and the parent being able to work as well and being safe? And are those kids interacting with older kids? Do you have them? Does the parent of the kid who needs to be around other children have an older parent at home? Michael, I don't have a specific question, but I have a curiosity, and then just kind of however you want to run with it. What about those nasty little children that put everything in their mouths and touch those masks, and you know, there's no 5-second rule, and they play with the cat and play with the dog and the turtle, and then they eat their sausage, and you know, that whole thing, and not washing their hands, and albeit I heard you say in the beginning, I don't know if you said evidence, but there seems to be not a high propensity for them getting sick. I mean, what's protecting them? Is this? I don't think that kids young have a stronger immune system necessarily.
No, so it's very, so as you guys all pointed out, what makes this difficult is that there's so much evolving information and we're uncovering and learning new things all the time. And I think all of us in medicine have gotten used to being able to say, yeah, well, I changed my mind because there's stuff we didn't know last week. So to address, first of all, Kenny, is that we're learning a lot more about the immune basis in young children. And there's actually, their immune systems are actually a lot stronger in very specific areas than adults. In fact, like for instance, in New York City, when all of these pregnant women were giving birth, Jayshree, I don't know if you saw this in your units, and almost all of them had COVID on some level. They all were either pre-symptomatic, they're all testing positive, thousands of women and all giving birth. No newborns got sick, none, zero got sick. And what we're learning now is the basis for that is because newborns have a special function they have a little factory called the thymus that pumps out these really active T cells that adults can't do. And we're learning more with that, how that has an amazing big role in COVID immunity, the killer T cell immunity. And the vaccine people are trying to leverage that and figure it out. And we think that has actually a lot to do with why kids 10 years old and under, to address your whole point, Kenny, about the phenomenal hygiene of 7 and 8 year olds, right, Elisa? So known for their amazing hygiene. Why they seem to be what we're coining this term viral dead ends, meaning that they don't seem to catch it for this reason. If they do catch it, they don't get sick or we get sick very often. And if they do, they seem unable to spread it in the same way that an adult can. So we're learning or starting to think of them as viral dead ends. Now, obviously, this is all evolving, and this is new terms that people are throwing out, and this might all change next week. But it really, the propensity of evidence really is pointing to that, which means that we are likely going to have a very different approach in how we deal with kids 10 and under, and then kids 11 to 17, because they clearly function differently from an immunity and standpoint in terms of how they distribute the virus. And you're right, Jayshree, we're going to have to be creative. That at least, a lot of the special needs population I take care of, the one thing I didn't hear you say is that school for them is such an important part of their therapy, that so many services are given in school for them that they wouldn't be able to get at home, and their parents can't provide because they're already overwhelmed with trying to work and care for them in other ways. And so we really do have to find ways to create situations where it is part of how we're going to educate them, and it can't be the same way we do the regular population from the expectations around social distancing and masking and all those other things.
Yeah. So that's all great stuff. Love it again. So if you like basketball, I know Michael does. You guys ever seen a person take a 3-pointer and the coach goes, no, and then it goes, it's like, all right. Yeah. So I can't tell you the number of times I had a little boy who's getting married this Friday, he's 28, who would sit his butt on a seat anywhere when he had to go, and I would go, no, oh God, and there it is. Right? But it seems that they were immune. So Elisa, thinking about a school and a budget, if I were running a school, I would think to myself, things are already tight. I don't want to increase my rates, especially in a time like this when the economy is what it is. Parents are already having a tough time. They need to be here, but I'm going to have to probably have more PPE. We know children lose jackets, so they're going to lose masks, right? They leave their coats. A mask is harder to keep up with. Equipment for taking temperature. Maybe the filters have to be changed more often, maybe a better ventilation system. How are you thinking about that in the fall in terms of budget and then anywhere else you want to run with this?
Well, you know what? I think I think what gives most people security is having a plan. Most people are okay if their plan needs to adjust, but they would like a plan to follow. And so for our school, what we've done is we've said, so we never closed during the pandemic. We didn't close. Our enrollment dropped drastically. Our school caters from 18 months to 7. And our school during the pandemic my 7 and below population dropped to 3. And the rest of my kids were actually students that returned whose parents were like, I have to work. I can't do the homeschool stuff at home and I need to work. So I had this little micro community of 1st through 5th graders. And so for us, we were able to, it helped us get ready for the fall because I could plan this out. So the mask, kids do lose things, and that's why parents should be practicing with the mask over the summer. But the mask can be fairly inexpensive, especially if you know somebody who will make some, and have the class mom. I think this is a time where the community has to come back together as a community. And so we have PTA, and you have all the class mom and class dad. You need to ask a parent, be in charge of making masks regularly for the classroom. Pitch in. Those are not that expensive. The HELPA filters for each classroom are $230 to $280 on Amazon if you want one just specifically for your classroom. We're going to have to crowdfund. We know that we can't depend on the government, especially right now, because we have some branches of the government saying specifically, if you don't bring all your kids back, you're not going to get your money. Not only that, we're going to make an incentive so that private schools will take these kids, and we're going to give you less money. And so I think that's really scary for the schools, and they're trying their hardest to figure out how to compensate for that. You need to come up with, how are you going to do lunches? Are you going to do lunches in the classroom? How are you going to have the students bring the lunch? What happens if the parents forget their lunch that day? So for us as a school, our thought is, let's take away as much stress from the parents as we can, because their stressors tend to make our job harder. So we don't allow parents to bring snack and food to school. We provide all snacks, all food at school. We do that because we don't want to forget it. But now we can't serve it the way we normally do it. So we have to now have the teachers serve the food rather than the students serve each other. So that's one of the adjustments that we've needed to make. When it comes to supplies, we have to, if it's important to you that your child returns to school, you need to accept that there is a base of supplies that you're going to have to send. And those supplies have already hit about $150, $200 in previous school years. So you're going to need to say, I want my kid has to go back to school. I accept that they're going to have these personal items that normally are shared with a classroom. My kid has to have their own specific one, and I'm going to have to bite that. And so I think it's going to have to take a lot of community awareness, but then the schools just saying it plainly. Say, this is what we have to do. And if it goes away magically on November 5th, like some people think, yay. But if it doesn't, we are already in the new, and we're already working with those new standards.
Gotcha. So something I want to throw at you, Jayshree. You're thoughtful about different folks on levels, and here's what I mean by that. I used to do significant volunteer work and helping in Oklahoma City public schools in a particularly challenged neighborhood, if you will. And we used to kid about this cycle of people and trying to get them on the same page. So when you already have a challenge in certain neighborhoods, like we would say, the teachers are afraid of the administration and the principal's afraid of the school board's afraid of the parents are afraid of the kids, and the kids ain't scared of nobody. So how do we bring this thing together and get these stakeholders on the same page?
I think as with anything else, it starts off with just really respectful communication, which is hard to have when you have groups who are afraid of one another or intimidated by one another or angry and not trusting of one another. So, like if I look at just parents of kids with special needs, oftentimes we are very untrusting of the school or the school district. And that's because, we've heard stories from other families, but we've been through some stuff too, where it just seems like sometimes the school, your principal, whomever, is not really advocating for your child. And if that's your frame of reference, it's hard to come together in one place. And that's most of what we need right now. I think that there has to be some communication about all of the concerns. And I think what would be helpful, and it's hard, but would be for parents to really understand that schools honestly don't know what to do. Like, they're not trying to be difficult. They're not trying to be antagonistic. They simply do not know. And they may be getting some partial guidance from their state. They're getting some other guidance from the federal government. And as was pointed out, I'm not sure if it was Michael or Lisa who said it, there's a threat of money being taken away, right? And so, it's not like the school is trying to be cagey. They honestly just don't know. And I think that this is probably, again, one of those times where we will find solutions in our ability to innovate and be resourceful. It might be where you have, for parents who have to work, maybe they kind of pool, 5 or 6 parents pull together and say, you know what, for this semester, we're going to put our money together. We're going to hire somebody to come in and teach our kids. But we all have to be on the same page, right, about what we do, not only what our kids do, but in our households, right? Because if we're going to do this and try to have this contained unit, that means we can't be running all over the community and bringing things into our house and possibly introducing an infection to someone in our group. I think that for a while, we're going to have to be really innovative and think outside the box until we know more about the virus. And it isn't just like the here and now, right? Because at this point, we're finding out more and more about complications that arise after people have recovered from this. And so we don't even know what that is. When we look at kids, we still don't even know what a long-term effect might be. And so as time goes on, we're constantly learning things, and we have to be ready to pivot and do something different. And we have to just really think unconventionally right now, because there are no conventional solutions. And there probably won't be until we get a vaccine.
Gotcha. So that little oracle thing in your eyes says you have something to follow on that with Elisa.
You know what I do as a school, I can tell people how, because you're saying they're pulling from so many places. So daily during March and April and May, daily I would receive emails from the CDC that were specifically geared towards childcare in schools, the state of Texas that are specifically geared towards childcare in schools, and then also our county. So each of those days, schools and anyone who's dealing with children will sometimes receive multiple emails, to the point where at one point our school was limited to only being able to serve essential children of essential personnel. Well, then we received an email on a Thursday that no outside shoes were allowed to be in starting the next day at 7 a.m. So there's all these real integral, but because everyone's coming at you and it's always an evolving knowledge, you'll get there. On a Thursday, we received an email with a 13-page email with standards we now had to meet by the next day at 7 a.m. And so some of these standards were more than the thermometer. Some of these standards were no more drinking. Everyone had to have a bottle that was individually theirs. There could not be any shared water faucets, any shared cups, any shared pitchers. So that's where the schools are trying their hardest to they're being micromanaged now by 3 different agencies. The scary part of that, though, is that even though these agencies are sending us information, and this is where it takes a lot of trust from parents, especially parents with health concerns or family members with issues that make them at a higher risk, we are no longer being inspected or monitored because they don't want licensing inside of schools right now. They don't. Our health inspection is 6 months past due. 4 months past due, because we're not allowed to let any unauthorized adults inside our school, including them. So even though they're giving school these guidelines to follow, if the financial burden, Kenny, like you were talking about earlier, is too heavy, you will have schools that do not have to meet them because no one's going to hold them accountable except for parents if they choose to speak up.
So speaking of that, also, you want to expand on technology. Is that an issue for you guys? Are you going to offer any distance learning?
So we will not offer distance learning other than Zoom circles. I'll do morning group activities on Zoom. During the pandemic, we were actually open full time with students, and I was doing parent mental check-ins once a week. And then as needed during the evening times, but I was also doing one-on-one Zooms with handfuls of my older students. below a certain age, Zoom is pointless to do with groups unless it's just like, let's sing and dance together. And so you have to look at the children and the family's personality, whether or not technology will really be a realistic home tool for them to use.
Hey, so I had lunch with a guy in Charlotte. Today is, what's today? Gosh, they all run together. Wednesday. Last Saturday, I was in Charlotte, and the guy looking at a deal, and he has two daughters. I don't remember the exact age, but one's, I think, 12 and one's 10, or they're 10 and 8, but they're 2 years apart. And apparently the younger one is doing just fine with all this. And he's discovered that they like being outdoors. He didn't know it before. He's like, had I known this before, we'd have hiked more, but they love it. But the younger one is fine with all the home activities and everything, but the older one is having a hard time missing her friends. And so even in that one family, there are two different scenarios going on with the two different little girls. Michael, what do you think in terms of, and of course, as I'm asking these specific questions, guys, obviously feel free to divulge off into your own direction, but some things that I think people would be curious about, even if you've touched on it before, to know. What about, is there any kind of a checklist of thought pattern you mentioned earlier on that you're wanting people to be their own experts? So if I have, 2 kids or 3 kids or 1 kid, and, I work in a factory and I have a father who's 80 years old that we visit on the weekends, or maybe he even lives with us, right? We've done the mother-in-law, father-in-law build out. What's your thinking on how people can sort of go down a list and think about what's best for them?
Actually, I actually wrote an article about this because I really wanted families to be able to have a guide to think about their priorities. And so when I made a list of it for families about, and I even made a little chart, like I even created a little table for people to put these things on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of, how they fall and how big a priority they are in your home. In order to help. So, I mean, I meant, at least the things that I mentioned are, physical risk. Do you have intimate contact, or do you live with someone who's over 65 or has high blood pressure, kidney disease, obesity, or diabetes? If you do, that really has to change how you think about how your kids coming back and forth from a school building is going to impact the physical risk to them, or if you as a parent fall into one of those categories. The emotional risk cannot be understated or overstated, really, that different kids, if you guys all mentioned, have a different emotional response to the situation. And every kid is, and parents have to also be able to consider their own emotional well-being in part of the equation. This is not the time for parents to go, hey, it's not about me and I don't matter. You do, because if your emotional well-being is being sacrificed here, you're not going to be able to make the best choice for your kids. You're not going to be able to help them. And so your child's emotional well-being, your emotional well-being, the economics are not a small thing. At least I know you have families that if they didn't have you as a resource, they would lose their home because they couldn't generate an income. So much of America, and I'm not talking just people who have to work in low-paying retail. Many, many, many of us still, if we miss 2 major income cycles, I can't pay our mortgage, having nothing to do with whether you are a PhD, MD, graduate level person, or a person who graduated high school and works in retail. Many of us are in the same boat there. So you can't understate that. And in terms of, there is the developmental piece for your child, like Jayshree was mentioning, children who have intellectual and physical challenges, as well as the kids who just have issues with their own resiliency. There is a developmental risk, and your child's social, emotional, and academic development can be affected here. And how does your choice impact that? So you got to put, those are the factors, I think, when I was thinking about this, people have to weave that all together and use whatever science is available. But the problem is the science has been politicized and not always straightforward to people, because if they subscribe to a particular political worldview, they may not, I'm seeing it all the time. It's so frustrating to have parents in my own practice come and go, this is America, I'm not wearing a mask. It's nothing, it's beyond frustrating and difficult. And unfortunately, it's spilling over. The anti-vaccine people have linked up with the anti-mask people, and it's all about government control and stomping on your civil liberties. And we can't think that way. We have to say there's evidence behind what we are asking people to do, and it has nothing to do with their civil liberties.
Yeah. And you're so right about that economic piece. There are literally people who live in, this is not an exaggeration, we probably all know them at minimum one, that live in $1 million homes and are 2 pay cycles away from eviction processes beginning. People just spend what they have, right? Yeah. Let's do a fun exercise, go around the horn, and we'll start with Jay Cherie and go to Lisa and then Michael. Maybe 2 rounds. Make an argument as like the high school debating team. Make a quick argument why we should open schools, and then in the second round, make a quick argument why we should not. And then maybe we'll just end with our real opinion. So why should we not open schools, Jay Cherie?
I think that we shouldn't open schools because we have failed to adequately contain the threat of coronavirus, and it is ubiquitous. So I think we shouldn't open them until we either have a vaccine or we have treatment that is effective enough that we can not only save lives, but decrease the morbidity associated with significant disease.
Lisa, why should we not open schools from a school owner?
One of the reasons why schools shouldn't open would be depending on how COVID is affecting their area specifically. If your area is getting hit really, really hard and there's always constant cases, your schools need to come up with another plan. If your cases are steady or dropping, then your school can make another choice. But the schools cannot open until we have more information about COVID and individually where your area is based on that. But until we're all on the same page, it's too high of a risk to send everybody to a school and to a place where they could be a petri dish.
Okay. Michael, why should we not open schools?
We should open schools because we don't know how to adequately protect the people who in the school setting really need to be protected, which are the staff. And we don't have the infrastructure anywhere in this country to do the adequate amount of testing and tracking it takes to ensure that the people in the school setting who are most at risk, who are the teachers and administrators, are going to be protected.
We should not open schools because the mask will become Kleenex on the little kids' snotty noses. Okay, Jay Cherie, why should we open schools?
Well, we should open schools because our students probably aren't learning adequately from the failure of us to open. I think one particularly hard-hit population is going to be the high school kids. I wonder if they will be ready for their standardized exams whenever those are being implemented again. Are they going to leave and be prepared for college when so much learning has been remote and they probably have missed out on a lot?
Lisa?
We should open school for emotional stability or mental health for not only the student, but for the families and for the economic impact. People need to go back to work. So we have to come up with some plan that allows us to have larger breaks, or if there's an outbreak at the school, shut it down. A dual day where class group A goes to school in the morning, group B goes to school after the school's been cleaned in the afternoon. Some sort of plan, because for a lot of students, their mental break is at school. Their stress-free area is at school. For a lot of parents who are holding on by a thread, they need their kid gone for 8 hours a day, and for either work or for mental stability.
What do you think, Michael?
I think what Elisa thinks. And, I love my children. I've never been sicker of staring at their mugs than I am now. But to try to come up with something original, because I agree with everything Elisa said too, I think we should open up school. I think we should go back to school because the science really supports the fact that 18 and under are the kids, are the population least at risk and least likely to get sick and have a problem. So it's misplaced anxiety about worrying about our kids' health and safety. That our kids' health and safety in this is very unlikely to be greatly affected. And so we should take all those other factors that everyone else mentioned should be moved up ahead of their health and safety with regards to COVID as reasons why they should open school.
I think we should open schools because if we expect people to learn, they have to be at school physically. I don't think most people have the discipline and the know-how to do it and focus remotely. And especially when the screen's off, are they going to really do their homework? Are they really going to follow up? When they're in a physical classroom, they may have time to do certain things, like, after the teacher's instructions of the lecturer. Some kids work faster than others. At home, particularly if the parent is trying to work from home or if the kid's been left home alone, they're just not going to do the work. That's what I think. So any other wrap-ups, guys? Chime in. I think we're a little earlier on this one, but I think this has been a really good conversation.
It might be, you know what, Kenny, I'm sorry to cut you off. It might be interesting for us, the people who still have children in school, for us to go over what we've made the decision to do if we have for the fall.
I was going to, well, great, because I was going to go around and say, you got to divulge publicly your vote. If there were a vote in your county or your town and you had to vote open or close, what's your vote and why? What's your decision?
Well, for me and my family, I'm actually not a big supporter of mass education. I've lost my respect for it in a whole. And so we have older children. My son will be going into 5th grade. My daughter will be going into 3rd grade. We made a choice to send our children to a school outside of us because we did not want them to always know that we could go talk to mom and dad. Mom and dad's at school, we can go talk to them. And so we wanted them to get outside exposure. We've lost that desire. And so we've allowed COVID to make the decision for us that our children will be coming back to our school. And so it's real convenient for us. But we've also made a decision to cut off the exposure of after school kids that come to us in the afternoon specifically, so that our bubble's a little bit smaller because we have parents with health issues. We have a lot of our children's parents are type 1 diabetes, have low immune system, all of those stuff. For us, that's been our decision. So we've made that decision to bring them back to the house.
I think it's interesting, the perspective that your kids, the age of your kids, you describe them as older kids, and I would say that those are younger kids. Also, the idea of sending them out to another school first to come back to you is sort of like the idea of business. I've often thought to myself, if my daughter wanted to work with me, I would require her to go work for someone else first. Mm-hmm. Michael, what do you think? Your decision, how would you vote?
I think that in line with what the pediatric community in this country has been stating all along, is that unless there's a compelling personal or unique issue in your home that would endanger or cause excessive danger to somebody, the massive equation and the weighing all of this, the scales tip very far in favor of sending kids to school in person.
And is that your decision in your own household?
Oh, I said I'm dropping them off whether or not the building's open, man. I'm dropping.
And look, and it also helps when you live in the Truman Show because you actually have a bubble.
Absolutely, yeah, right. It's easy. And yeah, I think that and there are creative ways to manage these other issues. There was a phenomenal guy from Children's Hospital Philadelphia who came up with this amazing list of things that I had not seen anybody else talk about, meaning, having teachers, even if the teachers have to do some combination of remote in the classroom themselves, meaning, and have teachers' aides sort of, manage that versus kids staying in pods and teachers rotating, but the kids staying in one place. Mm-hmm. So that minimizes movement, batch testing them at intervals so we know everyone's status all the time. Things like that, I think, can all be accomplished. It just requires some creativity. It requires some ability to break the mold of what everyone's already doing. The fixed idea of what we do in traditional classrooms might have to go away. And think about doing it.
You brought back some memories there, as you mentioned, CHOP. We know CHOP, Children's
Hospital Philadelphia, absolutely.
My son was born at HUP and then began going to CHOP.
Well, they're a national leader, thought leader in many things in my world. They're one of the tops of the top. So this is one of their docs was really, really creative about this whole thing. So yeah, that's where I'm with it. And I need people to drop their left or right wing views when it comes to evidence and science and be able to get behind something. That's
so, Jay Cherie, what's your personal family decision, and how would you vote for the masses if you were an elected official right now?
So, you know what, there's no one right answer for our family because we have we have 3 kids and they all have different needs, right? So Taylor is in college. I personally didn't want to see her go back to her college, which is in New York City. I felt like even though they have a great plan for how the students should socially distance, I did not see an entire population of kids living in the same dorms, you know, eating in the same cafeterias and the like.
I have 2 New York City college students, so it's really what school are your kids?
She's at Barnard.
Barnard. Yeah, I have 2 at YU in the Heights, and yeah,
I think that they're not likely to be compliant for very long, right? Because there are stringent restrictions. I don't see it happening. And then in a place like New York City, they're all out and about in the community. They're on the subways, they're on the buses, and so they're bringing back anything. So I didn't want to see that for her. For Jimmy, my youngest, who has autism, I think he doesn't need to be in a classroom right now because he will not be able to participate in a way that he can be safe or help others to be safe. I think he'd do better off being at home. And for my second son, Bobby, who is going to the 10th grade, I think that he'd do well with a hybrid setting. You know, he doesn't need to be at home too much because he tries to nap during the day. So if I'm not there, he's going to be napping. Right? But he needs to be in school sometimes, at least. And so I think there's no real one right answer for our family. I do like the school systems that have offered hybrid situations or they give options. I've seen a couple of school districts that are saying to their students and families, well, if you want to have your kid do remote learning, you can do that for the first 9 weeks or so of the semester, and then they can come in after that, or you can change at any time. I like that school districts are willing to be flexible in that way because the family might feel like, well, we can send our kid to school, we're going to try, or this isn't working, and after 9 weeks, we can keep our kid at home. I think that's a great way to go in the absence of having, you know, a perfect solution.
Perfect. Well, guys, unless anyone else has anything else, I don't see in anyone's eyes anything else. This has been a good conversation. I think it was good.
Me too, Jay.
If anyone happens to watch this who, you know, if they have children receiving services under special education, Michael mentioned something that was very important. And he talked about those kids who are getting therapy at school, who get speech therapy or behavioral management at school, or OT, PT, whatever it might be. Their needs are not being met in this situation. And if they're at home, chances are they're not. Right now, the way that the federal law is written, if a school district is unable to provide those services, and that's a part of that child's IEP, then compensatory services have to be offered. And that may mean that later on, the school district has to actually pay for that child to get those services elsewhere. And so I'd imagine there are going to be a lot of people requesting compensatory services because of the last several months of school. And so it's something good for the parents to know about. I don't know if the law will stay the same after all of this, because when it was written in 1976, no one anticipated a pandemic. But for now, those kids have the right to get their services, whatever kind of therapy it was they missed, you know, outside of school to make up for any deficit.
It's interesting how we know dates of things that are written based on what we have passion about. No, there's the ERISA Act of 1972. Employee Retirement Income Security Act, which addresses the prudence of managing money. Mm-hmm. Elisa, you had something to say.
You know what, this is what I'm talking to my community about, or children who cannot come to my school. Come up with a backup plan. If you need to send your children to school in the fall and you make that decision, but you know that there's a chance it could close down if this teachers all have an outbreak or something like that, this is a time for communities to come together. You need to you need to have a group of friends that your kids are melt well together, and you need to do a rotation. Have every kid goes to someone's house on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, for the students to interact with each other, but also for the parents to get a break. And then those parents can also go to work on their fourth day. Or come up with a plan where Jay was talking about it earlier, where you either know a parent who you could take on 5 or 6 kids, 10 kids, and they could be in charge of that home learning, and have that as your backup plan. So if your school district shuts because of an outbreak, or because there's Michael, tomorrow the science changes and they decide we're all going to die next week, you can put that plan together quickly, or that you can just put that plan into effect, because that will give you that peace of mind that so many people are looking for. Is they want to know what to do if. And so if you just go ahead, come up with some friends and say, you're going to be in charge of this, and we're going to compensate you so that we can all go to work and we don't all leave the house, then that parent or 2 parents might be able to bear the load. It doesn't need to be more than a few kids. It needs to be a handful of kids. No, don't try to open your own private school. But just come up with a backup plan.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. And even back in the early 80s, when I was in middle school, there was a version that some mothers did. Mm-hmm. Because at one point, the boys, so we've ended school at about 3, and our practice wasn't until about 6, because they had to have the JV boys and the girls and the JV girls. And so we'd go to someone's house on different days of the week, because that meant these 13-year-old boys got to eat you out of house and home on Tuesday, and you out of house and home on Wednesday, and then my mother out of house and home on Thursday. And that's very relevant to what you're saying, because they decided no one person needed to have these 13-year-old boys at their house 4 days a week and eat up $1,000 of food.
Right. And it's just part of just being a community and allowing, find a teenager, a 17-year-old junior, because that gives them something other than social media, and pay them a couple $100 a month or $1,000 a month. If you got a couple of them, pay them to be the student. 16 and 17-year-olds do so well when they're given responsibility in most cases, but they do so well when they're given responsibilities. Come up with a plan of action with you and your core group, and allow that to give you some sort of peace of mind during this chaotic time.
Michael, any last word? You're muted.
Got it. Sorry, my dog was making some.
Your bear was making noise.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. My house hippo. Just the last word on this is that the evidence is very, very promising that the vaccines will be effective and available by next year. I hope that 2 major groups have shown phenomenal results in their initial human trials and are moving into phase 3. And we're understanding so much more about the immune response and the immune protection related to COVID. And it's because it's not just one-dimensional. And so I'm very optimistic. And we've mentioned a couple of times if there's a vaccine, blah, blah, blah. But I, from what I read, I'm very optimistic that there will be an effective and, more importantly, safe vaccine that will absolutely change the course of this and return us to living the way we were used to living, I don't know, in February. So
sounds good. In the illustrious words of Franklin Ferguson, a friend from the University of Pennsylvania, I'm going to let Jay Cherie take us out because she knows the words.
Oh, from what Franklin always says?
Yes.
He says, peace and God bless.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye, guys.
Good night.